Welcome to another week of our community conversations. And for today's prompt, instead of a community question, I wanted to leave you with a little bit of community inspiration. And I want to share with you some of the words from one of my favorite teachers on Christian community, who also happens to be a renowned Lutheran theologian. You might have heard of him. His name's Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So first, just tell me if you relate. At this time where community is so important and we are tasked to show up for one another, I often find myself overwhelmed trying to do all the big things for all the people in my community, trying to show up in the big ways at the big times and stressing myself out a little bit in the process. If you relate to this at all, listen closely to these words of Bonhoeffer. The first service one owes to others in a community involves listening to them, Bonhoeffer says. Listening, that thing we do when we devote ourselves to another, when we are attentive to another and we are committed to hearing them. Bonhoeffer says, just as our love for God begins by listening to God's word, so too do we begin to love others truly when we listen to them. And God's love, vice versa, is shown not just by God giving God's word, but by the fact that God too lends God's ear to us. Listening. Showing up big is important, but maybe sometimes we confuse what big is. So this week I want to challenge you. How can you listen well? Maybe it's to those in your household, maybe it's a call to a friend, or maybe it's a safe and socially distanced run-in with someone you may not know very well who longs to be heard. How can we listen well? Sometimes it is the simplest things that mean the most, and I think that is what Bonhoeffer is getting at for us this week. Oh, and one more thing. Maybe it's not just doing the listening you need this week. Maybe you need to be heard. Let our community be a community that listens and lends its ear. It starts with us. We'll be back next week with another question, but for this week, let's listen. Have a great week.